can line that up a little
Yeah,
bit
you
later.
gotta do
We'll
the
be
sync.
good to go.
No, I understand.
I will say, practicing this is probably one of the more stressful things because you get one thing wrong, you can't use the whole video, any of the video.
There's little bits that you can do. There's little bits, but it's obnoxious to say the least.
And I hate losing stuff because then you got to call the person back again and find another hour out of their day. You feel like you wasted it all. So
I get it.
I'm glad. Thank you for coming back in here today. I appreciate you seeing me again.
Yeah.
So we're going to just start off with this pretty quick. So what's your background? What do you do? What's your company's name? What are your taglines? What are everything that you kind of talk about? What's your feel when you meet somebody?
Okay. So if somebody is meeting me, let's be completely honest, it's not usually a good thing.
Well, what's your name first?
I'm Mike. I'm Mike Almond. I'm with Woods Basement Systems. So all things basement-y. That's going to include, standard things that you would think about in a basement as far as waterproofing, foundation issues, cracking, things like that. We also deal with crawl spaces, making homes comfortable, making homes safe, concrete repair, variety of different things. But the main benefit and the main scope of what we do is if somebody's got an issue with their house, they call us, they call our company, and they send a specialist like myself out. It's doing an inspection of the actual home itself, make sure everything is taken care of, and giving them an idea of exactly why this is happening, exactly how it can be fixed, and then an exact cost based off of what their actual goals are.
Okay, cool. Sounds good. So it sounds like you deal with literally anything and everything that has to do with the foundation.
Yeah, let's be completely real about it. If I go to somebody's house because there's an issue, there's probably 15 things that they're going to bring up to me.
Right.
I like to say that my job is officially system design specialist, but I go into somebody's house. I've been dealing with the problem for 20 seconds when I get in the door. They've been dealing with the problem somewhere between 2 weeks and 6 years.
Right.
So I'm a therapist at the very beginning. They tell me everything that's going on, tell me what the concerns are and things like that. But yeah.
Awesome. Sounds good. Well then, so the next question I got for you is how often do you see foundation issues in your normal region? I assume you work in Missouri most of the time, yeah?
So our territory is basically Champaign, Illinois to a little bit past Columbia, Missouri.
Okay.
So we're pretty far spread out. That said, in my office, there's about 25-ish of me, and we're all running upwards of about 10 appointments a week. So to give you a scope, we're running into foundation issues a lot. Outside of rain season, I'd say that's mostly what we're looking at, some kind of foundation issue, some kind of settlement, some kind of wall destabilization, a lot of concrete repair work, things along those lines. So
what would you estimate the amount of houses in Missouri, let's say, or your area in general,
that
have foundation issues, just in general? Something that would be like, hey, we should probably get that fixed before it causes an issue.
Let me put it this way. I'd say 95% of homes at some point in their lifetime will have something that would present as an issue 95? That I would fix. But that isn't necessarily to say that all houses are broken or anything along those lines.
Right.
It is, I'm going to get called to a house because I'm seeing a hairline crack in a foundation wall. And what does that mean? Sometimes I get called to a house because, hey, my foundation is sitting 5 inches lower than the rest of the house, and I'm looking into daylight outside. So all houses have some kind of settlement. Settlement's going to occur based on the way that houses are built. But settlement doesn't necessarily mean that there's a huge problem right that second. It is a problem that can get worse. It is a problem that typically will get worse. But all houses are going to have some kind of modicum of settlement to them. It just kind of depends on how bad the issue gets and how proactive you want to be. Do you want to fix it before it gets worse and before it gets broken? Or is this something that you can monitor? So that's a lot of my job as well.
Fair enough. That's crazy. 95% are probably going to have some sort of issue at
some
some
kind
point.
Of issue at some point.
Whether it be hairline cracks or anything.
Right. And I just realized that I'm going to tell you, don't tell my company about this, but this is being recorded. There are a lot of times I go out to a house and I'll say, okay, you're not dealing with what we would qualify as settlement right now, but you do have the signs of something that will get potentially worse. It could get worse in 50 days. It could get worse in 50 years. I don't know. All I can tell you is that the initial signs are there. So monitor it, because the difference between me fixing it today and the difference between me fixing it 5 years from now, if this is the only issue that remains, the only difference in cost is going to be inflation. I don't want you to necessarily have to pay, thousands of dollars out of pocket to not worry about a thing if there is a 10% chance that it gets worse, and then down the road you're paying me that same kind of thousands of dollars plus an extra $250 because of inflation.
Right.
It's more about knowing what's going on and how it can be fixed, and then being armed with that knowledge to say, okay, well, if I do see this, if I do see what Mike said, if I do see these other signs, or if I start seeing it somewhere else, well, now I know how it would be fixed, and I can call them back out there to get it taken care of.
Sweet. That sounds awesome. Well, what kind of technologies do you use to aid in your work and everything? I know you were talking about some sort of laser or something last time.
No, so there's a bunch of lasers.
Kind of what you use in a day-to-day basis, and then some specialty terms.
So if I am going out for a foundation issue, there's cracks in the house, there's door frames that aren't opening, windows that aren't opening, things like that. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use a transit laser. Basically, it is a specialized laser that sits on its own level and gives me a rotation to where I am going to, whether the outside or the inside of the house, kind of depends on the layout and what I have access to, I'm going to measure the foundation across a perfect centered line. And I'm going to see, okay, at this back corner of the house, I'm measuring down from the top of the foundation or from the top of this line to my laser line, and I get 30 inches. Okay, now if I take that exact same line, my laser is not going to be in a different spot. But if I take 20 feet down the wall and I take another measurement from that top of the foundation wall to my laser line, and now I'm at 32 inches, well, I know that I've got some shift. So that's a transit laser. It just basically gives you a perfectly level line to measure the rest of the house against.
Nice.
As far as water, humidity is a big problem. Moisture is a big problem for houses.
Absolutely.
So moisture meters, hydrometers, things along those lines to measure how saturated building material is, whether it's drywall or the wood of the floor joists or anything else along those lines, see how saturated that is. Also just be able to get a reading on what's the humidity inside this area versus what it is outside versus what it is upstairs, things like that, to see if we're dealing with a really big discrepancy.
Okay.
It's not always that we're worried about a number being too high. It's how much variance am I looking at between different areas and what is there in place to control that. If there's nothing, well, then there probably should be.
Fair enough. That's cool. Well, actually, that kind of leads us into a different question that I'm going to skip around here a little bit. If you can't see behind walls, and what other indications of foundation movements, wall cracks, can you actually get to if you can't see them? So obviously, a lot of people have finished basements, this, that, and the other.
Right.
Can you get to it before it's really an issue if that is finished, or do you just kind of have to see it coming out of the wall or whatever before you actually know for a fact there's a problem?
That gets more into, there are still things that you can do as far as if I have something that I can measure on the outside for foundation settlement, visible cracks are not, the house isn't going to lie to me more times than not if I'm using a transit laser and I'm getting those precise measurements. But let's say, it's a house full of siding, so it's not exactly something I can trust in that hierarchy of confidence. People in my business, we love brick houses because a brick house does not lie on the outside.
Right, I guess, yeah.
Yeah, mortar lines are pretty trustworthy because if they weren't trustworthy, the house wouldn't be up there very long.
Yeah.
But in a scenario where I'm in a finished home fully, everything's covered, it gets more into, okay, is there any access to this? Is it a drop ceiling so we can get access to some of the floor joists and measure things off of that? Is it more into the detective side of things where now I'm asking, okay, well, how long ago did you finish this?
Right.
Because one of the things we see a lot in my industry, if a house is recently been put on the market or has been recently purchased, and then I ask, okay, I'm here pretty early into this scenario, how long ago was this area finished? Or the area below the area where you think there's some kind of issue. And it was finished right before they put the house on the market. Well, that means that there's a chance that they did that to try and improve the sale and the value of the home. There's also a pretty good chance that they did that because it's a lot easier to hide issues than disclose them and still get everything that you're wanting. You have to rely on the goodness of people on sometimes as far as what's going on and why is it going on, because again, nobody's excited for me to come through the door unless they've been dealing with an issue for a long time and they're ready to take care of it. But it's kind of going into, I hate to say it's just common sense at some points, where if I'm there because there's an issue, well, what does that issue usually follow up from? If I've got issues upstairs, that's usually an issue that's coming from below. So where are those mirroring sites? Where am I seeing, here's the door that doesn't open and we're worried about it? Okay,
Right.
well, is it in the middle of the house? Because that usually means that it's a supplemental issue.
That makes sense.
Is it a foundation issue because it's on the outside? And just doing what we can to kind of find those points.
Well, while we're on that topic, why don't I ask you this? What do you think about either the plastic or the normal insulation behind finished walls in a basement? Do you think any sort of insulation or that plastic that they put behind it is a good or bad thing? Because obviously it's got a sweat,
Sure.
it's a porous thing. So is that causing more of an issue than it would be just to run a dehumidifier in the basement and keep normal insulation there without a vapor barrier or anything?
It depends on the material. Right?
Okay.
So not to be a company shill, but I'm going to be a company shill. So there are lots of different vapor barriers, right? If I go into a crawl, and I know this is tangential to what you were saying. If I go into a crawl space and there is a see-through plastic liner, a transparent transparent liner on the actual ground, and that's all there is. Well, that's a vapor barrier. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's actually doing a good job of it, though. If I go into a crawl space and it's a antimicrobial, fully encapsulated, it's attached to the actual foundation walls, it's running through the entire area, that's a vapor barrier, and it's blocking a significantly larger amount of that issue, right? If I go into a house and it's got some kind of liner on the walls, well, what kind of liner is it? Is it antimicrobial? Is it something that is actually blocking vapor and it doesn't allow mold to grow onto it? Is it something that is just a regular insulation? And hey, regular insulation is fine as long as there's not actual water or moisture coming through to soak into that insulation and things that are going to cause bigger issues down the line. I will say this: if we're not dealing with specifically water coming through, a dehumidifier is something that I recommend for everybody, and I always tell them to your comfort level, as long as your comfort level is below 50% humidity, because that's where a lot of those issues as far as moisture, saturation, mold, things like that, that's where they're going to start to exacerbate. So anything below 50% is typically in the safe guidelines.
Okay.
And as far as the everything else, it's I'd love to tell you there's a definitive, insulation versus liner versus different type of liner.
Right.
I mean, yeah, we can do it the best, but there's a lot of things that you can do that are going to get you the result that you need with just a little bit of prevention.
Okay, fair enough. Interesting. Just kind of curious about what you would think about that. So bowing and wall movement, is there any way that you can look at that at home without necessarily calling you first and being like, hey, I can see it, I want to know how bad it is, that kind of thing? How does someone at home do that without using your
my
laser transit laser?
If somebody wants to take care of it, but they don't have time for me to come out there and they don't feel like spending, hundreds or $1,000 to get said laser.
At least to know if it's worth
to
calling
figure it out. So there's a couple of things. The first thing that I say to look for is cracks.
Okay.
Let's say we're dealing with an unfinished basement first, because that's the easiest.
Right.
In a poured foundation wall, to where it's all one solid form of concrete as opposed to a block wall. If towards the corners of a wall, towards the ends of it, you're seeing diagonal cracks, that is usually a sign that there is a lot of pressure pushing onto that wall, and that's going to destabilize it somewhat. That destabilization, that's typically a bowing wall. How big are those cracks? How often are we seeing them? How thick are they, etc.? Frankly, one of the things that you can do, and this sounds silly, I'd assume that just about everybody has like a 1 foot level for, whether it's...
Most people.
Yeah.
And even so, they're $15 at Home Depot or whatever.
Mounting pictures, something along those lines. If you're ever curious, buy a 4 foot level. They're going to be probably about $50-$60.
Yeah.
But if you're really that worried about it and you're not sure, okay, go buy a 4 foot level. It'll take you one trip or one Amazon or one anything along those lines, and just put it up against the wall in a couple of places. And look, as you're going up and down that wall, as long as you're giving it a vertical, actual straight line, okay, are the bubbles out of place? Is there a big issue? Walls have their own stages of wall failure, and as soon as it's starting to lean, it's already there, right? A block wall has 4 stages. You're going to start to see some diagonal cracks. You're going to start to see a horizontal crack, typically around the frost line.
Okay.
So stair step cracking.
Frost line meaning where ground starts, kind of thing. A foot below ground.
Basically, like yeah. It's about a foot or two below ground, depending on the area that you're in.
Okay.
To where that topsoil area, when it gets cold, it starts to harden and freeze faster than everything else, and that causes it to shift. And over seasons, it's basically like having the world's slowest battering ram hit into your house just a little bit for a couple of months and then go away, and then hit into your house for a couple of months the next season and then go away.
Interesting.
So if you start to see that horizontal crack on cinder block, if you see stair steps on cinder block, and when it really gets bad, you'll actually see the bottom block versus the rest of the actual wall. So the block that's attached, or not attached, but the block that is somewhat hidden by the concrete floor, you'll see it be slightly pushed back versus all the rest of the other blocks. That's called shearing.
Okay. That sounds bad.
Shearing
sounds bad in concrete terms.
Yeah, it's stage 3 of 4, and the next stage is the worst one because it's called failure.
Okay, that makes sense.
So failure. So shearing is bad. Failure, only thing that's worse.
Yeah.
Poured walls, you don't get that shearing effect, and you typically don't see that horizontal cracking. If you do, that's probably rebar pop. Just water vapor or water gets into the concrete itself. If there's rebar in it, it absorbs some of that water, it starts to rust, and when it rusts, it starts to expand.
Right.
And when things expand and they are completely encapsulated in concrete, well, there's not a whole lot of room for that to move, so eventually you get those pops.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Awesome. I appreciate that. So speaking of cinder block and foundations and stuff, how do you feel about cinder block foundations compared to normal foundations when it comes to water?
Yeah.
Is it easier to remediate, or is it just something that you're going to deal with halfway consistently after a certain point?
Sure. The good news is, as far as I'm concerned, my fix is the same just about either way. If I'm dealing with a waterproofing issue and I've got a cinder block foundation versus a regular poured foundation, my fix is the exact same. So that's good news. As far as for a homeowner who doesn't want to have to see me, the sad follow-up to your question is, how did they build it? Right. Because if they are just hollow blocks and they did not completely pour concrete and everything like that through the rebar to attach all those blocks, that typically means that they are hollow. And if they are hollow, that means that those walls are filling up with water before it ever comes into the home. If it's filling up with water before it ever comes into the home, it's going to come into the home at some point. And there's a lot more moisture living in those walls than you want in any kind of situation. So it kind of depends. I'd say I'd love to tell you that more houses with block walls are not hollow, but I also have a bias because if I'm going to a house, that's because there's a problem, and if it's a block wall, then it's probably going to be a hollow wall as opposed to the alternative. I like block walls because when they are broken, it's a lot easier for me to explain, hey, this is why this is broken. This is why this is happening, because all of these other things are here. As far as an actual build, frankly, it doesn't really make a huge difference to us. When there is an issue, I don't see more issues in block walls than I do in poured walls. Okay. It's just, how is this water getting in? How is this wall being pushed? How is this foundation sinking and settling? And that's going to happen everywhere, because the main issue with foundations and why they fail and why water comes through isn't really the foundation or the build for the most part. It's the soil. It's the water outside. It's all these other things that you can engineer solutions to fix, and you can do a lot of preventative stuff on the front end. But man, it's not something that a lot of builders are going to go out of their way to do, because that cuts into their profits, it cuts into their time, it cuts into all the things that keep them operational. Right. So unfortunately, it's just, again, all houses, 95% of houses are going to have some kind of issue. It's just whether it's a bad enough issue that it needs to be taken care of, or if it's an issue that, hey, you should probably just keep an eye on this in case it becomes an issue.
Right. That makes sense. You know, I'm really glad you brought that up. I was going to save this for a little bit later, but I really like this question. And we talked a little bit about this last time I saw you.
Yeah.
How would you build a foundation as an expert if there was no object of money to do it the quote-unquote right way to avoid all issues? You never want to see water. You never want to do any of that. You don't want to see cracks or whatever. How do you do it?
All right. If I don't want to see cracks, the first thing I'm doing is I'm not building a house out of concrete.
Fair enough.
Because concrete's got two different types of guarantees to it. It's going to get hard. It's going to crack.
Fair enough.
you've dealt with enough people like me that's probably not the first time you've heard that statement.
Not at all.
So I would want to, first of all, my waterproofing system. The reason waterproofing systems fail, why, hey, I've been in this house for 30 years. I've never had water in it until last week. And now I get water in it every day since it's rained. The reason waterproofing systems typically fail is because they are located in the dirt. They're located outside around the footing off the initial build of the home, or there's an interior footing drain where basically as they're building the footing, they're pouring the footing first. Think of that as kind of the frame that the foundation wall and the slab floor are going to sit on top of. It's a 3-piece foundation. That's most homes are going to be built that way. Because that waterproofing system is located in the dirt, when it does its job and it collects water, it's collecting water in dirt. When dirt collects water, it becomes mud. When mud is into a trench system or something that is basically a pathway to collect something, and it's collecting mud, well, it's going to clog a little bit over time. So when they clog, they work more slowly. When they work more slowly, they can't get rid of the water as fast as they're supposed to, and then the water has to go somewhere, which is in the house. So having a system, the one that we have, it specifically sits on top of the actual footing itself. Okay. So it's beneath the slab floor, so it's not something that's, I'm not showing a moat around the inside or outside of your house.
Which some people do.
The amount of times that I go to somebody's house because they've got a water issue and that's the way that they want to fix it. If somebody tells you, French drain system, it's a really fancy word for moat, which kind of works until it doesn't. Right. Because again, it's located in the dirt, which means at some point it's going to start to fail. Yeah. So a system that's located on the footing, so it's not located in the dirt, so it can't ever get clogged, so it can't ever slow down, so it doesn't fail. That would be how I would build the actual waterproofing system. As far as to prevent any kind of settlement, really the answer is you peer it before it happens. So whenever we are dealing with foundation settlement as an issue for a house, typically we're talking about pier work. Push piers are steel tubes that are going to be driven down into the actual earth itself underneath the foundation until you're reaching load-bearing strata or bedrock, whichever one is first. You can, and in fact, some custom builds are built with some kind of push pier or helical pier system to stabilize that foundation. So, hey, it's never going to be an issue as far as it moving because we've stabilized onto bedrock. That soil isn't going to shift or move, which means all of the house that's sitting on top of it with these piers, they aren't going to move either.
Perfect. Interesting. Yeah. Interesting. Is that how you would do it?
When the money is no object scenario that you gave me, yes, that is how I would do it. That said, it will cost less to take care of these issues in a house during the build as opposed to post problem, because then there's a lot more demo work involved in fixing the issue. It's a lot easier to, like I said, the ounce of prevention being worth a pound of cure. Yeah. It's a lot easier to have that ounce worth of prevention. However, that ounce worth of prevention is expensive. The pound of cure is more expensive, but it's still an expensive standpoint to start with.
Right. That makes sense. Cool. All right. Break time. I got it.
Yeah, you're good.